Okay, welcome everybody. Of course, welcome to my channel and welcome to Python for Beginners. So this is a very much a entry level or beginning level tutorial and series of tutorials on my channel that talk about learning how to code using Python. Okay, and I'll be using the Visual Studio Code platform. So there are lots of tutorials out there that kind of talk to you about, okay, well, the first thing we got to do is go to python.org and download Python. So we'll be using a version of Python 3. And of course, then you need to go to Microsoft and Visual Studio and download Visual Studio Code. Now, I'm using Visual Studio Code. You do not have to use Visual Studio Code because this is going to work regardless of platform. So if you want to use PyCharm, Visual Studio, or just the IDLE, the integrated development environment that is specific with the Python download, that's all good. All this is a text editor, and I'm going to use it. I'm just very comfortable with it at this point, and this is going to be good for learning how to code. So it is a black background. I do like that. I can actually see what I'm looking at better because as you can see, I'm going blind, thus the glasses. So my game plan for all of this is kind of walk us through a series of very entry level, beginning level Python code. So we're going to start here talking about variables, and there are four essential types of variables in Python code. So we're going to talk about string, we're talking about integers, we're talking about floats, and we're talking about Boolean values, okay? So a string basically is a line of characters or various characters that you will store in a variable, okay? So that's a lot of things right now. So basically a string is going to be something like somebody's name, Mike. Now it could easily be Mike Smith, okay? And that's also a string. And it could easily be MIKE 1234, okay? So a string is just a series of characters that may or may not have any specific value, but you're inputting that or you're giving the program its value, and we're going to store that into a variable. So there are four things that I want you to be aware of, and then I'm going to add one more. It's called the variable. So we'll be talking about string variables, integer variables, float variables, and Boolean variables, okay? And the variable here is simply the box or the storage space that we're going to put that element. So for my Mike 1234, we are going to store that in what's called name. So let's go back and just call it Mike. And as you can see, it has single quotes around the word Mike. So, and that's very specific. Python needs those quotes, and I'm going to use single quotes. We could also use the double quote, okay? It's just a lot quicker and easier just to type the single quote. Now I'm going to go back and do it all over again. Mike with a single quote. And that's okay. Now, there are going to be times when I show you that it's going to be important to use double quotes versus single quotes and vice versa. But for right now, we're just simply creating the value for the variable. And my value right now is Mike. So let's move on. I also have integers. Integers are whole numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and continue the count, negative 1, 2, 3, 4, and of course 0. So we could actually have a 0 value, and that's okay. And we'll talk about why we specifically want to use integers in our programs, but we know that we can perform math operations. So addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. We could use exponents. We could group numbers together. We could do all kind of things as you did in grade school. We could do here in our program as well. So with that being said, just let me pull him out. So now we have one example of a string. We have one example of an integer, and now we go to a float. A float is a whole number with a decimal point. So it's a whole number with a fraction of a number. And in my particular example, I simply have 2.5. So if I hover over the name of the variable or the variable itself, I could then identify what's called the data type. So I've been talking about data types to this point. So this data type is an str, which is a string. So it's simply a mix of characters put together that I want to store in this variable. And again, I want to make it make sense. This is not my name, but it works just the same. So with this, I do have an int. An int is an integer. So again, a whole number. This knows by default that this 20 is an integer. It's a number, and it's seeing it as an integer, as a integer data type. Down here, I've got 2.5. It says here that it is a float. The variable identifies it as a float data type, so that's good. And then down here we have what's called a Boolean value, and a Boolean is true or false. It's on or off. It's one or the other, and we're going to be looking at true-false concepts throughout our programming tutorials out here. So I have this variable called isOpen, and the keyword here is true with a capital T. If I did this, that doesn't mean anything specific. It's not a keyword in Python. I actually have to give it the capital letter T, and this then knows that it is a Boolean value. The other one is false. So as you can see, I'd have to use the capital letter F, or else it's not specific to Python. And so this is a Boolean, and the variable knows that it's a Boolean value. Okay, so typically to get anybody started in coding, we initiate all of you with the Hello World program. This is the Hello World program. So what's going on down here? These are all variables. These are all print statements. So what's a print statement? The print statement has the keyword print with these parentheses around it, okay? So this is, by a basic terminology, this is going to be a method that we can call that will do something for us. And the only thing it's really doing for us is it means it's going to show us what's in these parentheses when we run the program. So when I click run up here, I'm going to see a couple of things, and it's going to perform, it's going to show us these things in the console. So these are all going to be console-based programs, because this is how we learned how just to use the language. So if we were writing in a notebook or a journal, we'd be using words and numbers to write in a journal. So the journal is what we can read, and again, everything that's inside the journal that we pass to the journal is, of course, in our head. So this is all the stuff that's in our head, and when we run it, everything pushes to the console. So this is going to be the console. In Visual Studio Code, it's called the terminal, but if you hear the word console in anybody's tutorials out there, they're pushing things to the console, and that's where you'll see the output of your program. So right now I'm going to turn it off or put it in the trash can because I don't want it right now, but we are going to get to it. So the print statement is what prints to the console. So if you want it to do something, if you're looking at your code and it's not producing any output, that means you didn't put whatever you want it to show on the terminal or the console inside a print statement, okay? So that's what that does. So we have variables, we have strings, integers, floats, and Boolean values, and we have print statements. And that's really the basics. That's where you get started in coding. So this works like C# a little bit. The syntax is a little bit different. If you're coming from C++ or another coding language, this all may be familiar with you. It just looks differently, but this is kind of getting us started. So we have variables, we have data types, and we now have functions, or the print function. So these are the foundations that get us started. Really boring stuff, but all good. So what happens here is inside this print statement, I actually have a string, and it's called hello world. Otherwise, I am assigning value to certain variables, and those words will change over time, but I'm assigning this 20 to price, this 2.5 to rate, and this false to is open. And all I'm doing then is calling the name of the variable, and the name of the variable won't print. The value of that variable will print. So this will print Mike, this will print 20, this will print 2.5, and this will show me false. I always say cross my fingers because this is technology and it doesn't always work, but this is rather straightforward. I'm only kidding. So this is rather straightforward. So we should get our specific output. And we do. Hello world, Mike 22.5, and false. So this is the start of a brand new journey for us. I will continue to make these almost daily if I get the opportunity, but of course, as often as I can. I'll see you next time.